Our guest today, folks, is someone who we are incredibly indebted to here at Down in the Hole. And outside of Waits himself, has probably had the most impact on how we approach the music and ultimately this podcast. Released in 2008, the totemic Lowside of the Road was, for all intents and purposes, our Bible as young, ravenous Tom Waits fans, and it has remained so for that time, with no publication coming anywhere near the quality or depth of research that you'll find in those pages. In addition to publishing several other highly regarded rock texts, he was the associate editor for Mojo magazine and has written for every rock publication under the sun, Rolling Stone, Melody Maker, NME, as well as co-founding Rock's Back Pages in 2001, which is the number one resource for our respective Paul McCartney and Metallica podcasts. And somehow, folks, we've been fortunate enough to make contact with him during these uncertain times, and he's here today to talk to us about his work and Tom Waits. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Barney Hoskyns. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing fine, Sam. Thank you for the build-up.
My gosh. Tom, we first read Lowside of the Road back during Taizé, which was one of our trips at Catholic school to a Catholic camp in France. And that was about, 12 years ago?
10 years ago, something like that, yeah. And Barney, so great to have you on as well. I mean, at the risk of pandering, which we're going to do throughout, I'm a little bit of a Barney Hoskyns fanboy as well as a Waits fanboy. Like, from Lowside, I was digging into all your books. A big listener to Rock's Back Pages podcast. I even don't mind Mark Pringle's laugh, you know?
I'll tell him that. It's a very divisive issue.
It comes up in the reviews and the episodes and stuff like that. But yeah, as Sam mentioned, like we went on this trip when I was when we were like 17, 16 years old, camping, and there's actually a photo of me in a chair, ignoring everyone else, digging deep into Lowside. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's kind of been the Bible. It's been the touchstone in terms of the Waits literature. So I guess thank you at the top of the hour just for doing that. Like, you know, we refer to it constantly.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot.
So, the podcast has always been a catalogue of great stories of how people first got into Tom Waits. Some of our best correspondence has just been people telling us their esoteric stories about how they first found this strange music. But do you feel like you had an unfair advantage since you got to listen to albums like Small Change and Blue Valentine with Nick Cave?
Well, I do owe Nick something on that. I mean, I was living in this flat with Nick Cave in the spring and summer of 1982. And my memory is, and memory is always an unreliable narrator, isn't it, really, that he had a copy of particularly Small Change. I'm sure he had this copy of Small Change and would put it on the turntable. I mean, I knew about Waits before that, but I couldn't have said that I was a sort of, kind of passionate fan at that point. I think I sort of got Waits through Nick's passion for him. When I've been aware of him in the 70s, Nick's taste very seriously, and Waits was clearly a writer that he admired. So yeah, I think it probably did give me an unfair advantage. And then it was kind of, but it was really Swordfish. It was that year when he released, the One from the Heart soundtrack, or it was belatedly released, and then Swordfish Trombones came out. That was the sort of year that made me realise just how great Waits was.
Something I've always wanted to know, straight from the horse's mouth, as it was, I know you've mentioned this before, but how jarring was it to go from something like One from the Heart to Swordfish Trombones? Like, has an artist, in your experience, ever made such a drastic U-turn in their career progression before?
Well, probably not. I mean, my memories of like being at NME, and lots of people were into Waits, and we were all astonished by the fact these two records came out within, I can't remember how many months of each other now, but it did seem, they seemed just kind of at polar opposites musically. And there are kind of little tiny moments of overlap, but, still to this day, it seems inconceivable that one man essentially could be responsible for these two records, And I love them both equally.
And what was the germination of writing a book on Waits then? Because obviously by the time you wrote Lowside, you wrote many books yourself. but how did you survey the existing literature on Waits? Because it was weird to me, at least, that, you know, by the time you wrote the book, okay, there'd been a few, there'd been Patrick Humphreys and Wild Years, the music and myth of Waits, but to be frank, they're not to avoid a terrible pun, you know, they're not really befitting the man, you know, in terms of their integrity and rigor of research, etc. Like, were you surprised perhaps that there hadn't been a tome, like, you know, there's so many on the Beatles, Dylan, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was, and it was one of the reasons that, you know, I settled on Waits as a subject of a major biography. I wanted to do a major biography of a solo artist, and, you know, you kind of drew up a short list, and many people that I might have wanted to write about that already had 3 or 4 books written about them, major books, some good books, and no, Waits didn't have anything. You know, I do remember being, frankly, I mean, I hope Patrick Humphreys doesn't listen to this, but when he managed in his revised edition of the book to locate the Heritage Coffee House in Los Angeles rather than San Diego, I did sort of feel, yeah, you know, I thought, well, you know, someone.
Come on.
Yeah.
San Diego Serenade. Come on, Patrick.
Yeah, no, I know. And, you know, look, this isn't about having a dig at Patrick. It just, yeah, it was important to get this stuff right, I think, you know. So, I mean, he seemed to me already a huge figure at that point, a major artist, one of the greats. And so, you know, there it was. I mean, this guy needs, you know, a major biography. It's not going to be easy to do, given what I already know about Waits. This isn't going to be something that you're not going to get his cooperation, and he may even make it difficult. I mean, I knew going into it was going to be a bit of a challenge.
Well, yeah, he's kind of, you know, he's in that higher echelons of like a Prince level, where kind of impenetrable to get any fact. And he being himself an obscurant, a self-mythologizer, like, you know, you really had your work out for you. This wasn't another kind of canyon rock star, I suppose.
No, and in a way, I mean, so there were kind of upsides and downsides to that. There were real obstacles, but I also thought, you know, let's play with this. Let's try and have some kind of fun with this, because it's part of what makes him great, I think. You know, that he has created a sort of persona that he can not kind of hide behind, but do stuff behind this persona. And, you know, he's such an intelligent, maverick figure, you know, that I knew that this was a central part of what I was going to be writing about. You know, that he had sort of played with the kind of artificiality of it, his awareness of, you know, what he calls the business of show, the persona of the performer. I mean, you know, he's remarkably free of self-delusion, Tom Waits, I think. I think he's, you know, rigorously honest with himself. But within that, you know, he's had enormous fun and been enormously creative as an artist.
Something that like really comes across in the book, and I think it's what hooked me and Tom or like so early at that age, is just that you were so clearly like a fan of the music. And I remember when a couple of years ago I was talking with Howard Soons, who did Fab, An Intimate Life of Paul McCartney. He like talked about how he wasn't a particular fan of the music. And do you think that, you know, getting that across, that passion for the music, was integral to getting the definitive Tom Waits biography out there as well?
I mean, I think whoever you're writing about, if you're not a fan of music, to spend, you know, some years researching and writing a book, I mean, you know, I can't imagine it'd be much fun, you know. So informing everything I did and all the research I did and all the writing was definitely an absolute like devotion to most of his music. You know, I think I would find it very difficult to, as I say, to write a biography of someone whose music I didn't particularly like, or was just indifferent to, or felt, you know, neutral about. So, you know, that sort of went without saying for me. I wasn't going to do this, and if I didn't care a great deal about the guy, which I do.
And, I read in the back of the most recent edition of Cocaine Cowboys, which amazing book, by the way. Like reading that book, I had a notepad open at the side, writing down all the albums to check out because there was so much stuff that I'd never heard of. I think it was a Gene Clark and Doug Dillard album, The Fantastic Expedition. Or something, it's called something like that. Amazing. Get It On, Brother. If you've not heard that song, great song. And I remember in the back of the book, you interviewed, made by the publisher or something like that. You talk about your writing method. And if I recall correctly, you're someone who writes early in the morning in your shed. Is that what you did with Lowside, or?
Yes, I think so. I think I still had a shed. Don't have a shed anymore. Moved house a couple of years ago, so don't have a shed. Mainly work out of the Rock Spec Pages office. But have a little room here, certainly in lockdown, that I use. But then, had a shed, and I've always been a morning writer. So that's how it's always been for me. I tend to be a little more alert, a little fresher first thing in the morning. So after lunch, it's a bit of a sort of slow descent into kind of feeling a bit soporific, might get a second wind later in the day, but most of the good ideas and kind of flows that I've got into writing have been AM rather than PM.
And it's a rock biography, so inevitably it's going to be named after a song title by the artist or a snatch of a lyric. I mean, Low Side of the Road is a great name for the book. Did you have any other ideas? I mean, me and Sam have said like, maybe what's he building in there? Maybe a little more on the nose, but something like that could have worked. Or
it certainly was a contender. Probably the funniest thing that Waits ever did. It still makes me laugh out loud.
Oh yeah.
I actually, my kind of first choice, funny enough, was Take It With Me, because I just thought about that song and I liked the kind of ambiguity of that. The idea, that he was going to take his secrets to the grave. Not that that's really what the song means, but I can't. But I think Faber felt that they just needed something that was a little more, I suppose, kind of Americana-ish, or just said something. And we had this great picture that Jill Furmanovsky took, and she was on our podcast actually a couple of weeks ago, and we talked. There is a dog barking outside, but that's very Waitsian, so it's all good. It's Waitsian, isn't it? So let me just close the window a little bit.
A crow will never crow on cue.
This is a dog that never stops barking, but it's also the only place in the house I can get any peace. So we had this amazing photo, and I actually was standing like beside Jill when she took this photo of Tom in Santa Rosa. So the China Light Diner that I just interviewed him in is probably is where Tom is looking on the original hardback cover. It's probably, as I recall, maybe like less than 50 yards. He's almost looking at it as he's standing there. So it just made sense. I looked through, of course, as one does as an author, every single title of every Waits song, and it sort of spoke to me of the fact that he wrote so often about people who were sort of on the low side of the road rather than on the upside of the road, and I like that. Just life's drifters, life's marginalised characters, the downtrodden, the neglected, the forgotten. So it kind of spoke to me of that, and also just absolutely rate that particular track so highly. It on the album that I was specifically talking to him about on that trip. So it all just kind of made sense for me, Yeah, but what's he building in there? Could have worked. Are you hearing these beeping noises?
We are, yeah, but we were too bashful to say anything. So if you can just, can you put that on airplane mode perhaps or something? Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny.
Let me just see what I can do. I'm not very good at this. Here we go. Night.
I haven't heard the word bashful in a while.
Dude, no, it's we love bashfulness. Yeah. Hopefully that will stop it. It's I think I've stopped the notifications coming in.
Okay, fine.
Anyway, so your turn.
So obviously this book would take, this be a project of several years. Like, when did you first realise you had enough material for a book, and how long was it before you actually started writing it, like since the inception of the idea?
I mean, I don't remember how long. I mean, I know that, my sort of bare minimum for me, certainly at that point in my career, was that you couldn't do a book like this in less than 2 years. It was the minimum time would be a year of research and a year of writing, and that's a struggle. That's just working full throttle, not doing much else. Although one's always sort of juggling things, but with a book like this, I really like to go into a kind of tunnel, and you find you sort of resent any other work that comes in, even if you're being asked to interview somebody that you absolutely adore. You're like, I just want to stay in my Tom Waits tunnel, if that's okay. You just sort of take on this life becomes your mission and your calling, and becomes very obsessive. I think if you take the job seriously, you leave no stone unturned. You want to unravel every possible clue as to what might explain a man like Tom Waits. So, you talk to as many people as you can. You read as much as you can read. I mean, I think I spent obviously time in California, particularly in Los Angeles, mainly in Los Angeles. Just interviewing anyone who would talk to me, and some, of course, Waits had asked not to speak to me. Starting with Keith Richards, that was. I mean, as you'll know if you see the kind of emails at the back, Keith was one of the first people that I had interviewed Keith a couple of times, and he initially, the word came back that he'd be happy to talk about Waits, and then I think obviously, everyone's terrified of Waits, even Keith Richards. This is what I love. Even Keith has to sort of basically get Tom's permission. So word comes back, oh, really sorry, I'd love to talk to you about Tom. And, it did the sort of perversity of it. And I allude to this in the introduction. It seems so perverse to stop the greatest sort of rock and roll rhythm guitar player in the history of music from saying how great you are. But that's Waits. And you got to take your hat off to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think any interview with Keith might let slip to Kathleen that Waits may have broken his break from alcohol there. It was actually quite comforting to see in the back of the book that you couldn't get interviews with Chris Bloom or Matt Brubeck either, because we've really been trying to get those interviews as well. Yeah. Like, I love those bits at the back, though.
Some people felt it wasn't the right thing to do, but I just thought, you know what, let's be open about this, because in a way it is part of the story. I think it is part of the story. It's unavoidable with him. Yeah, and you guys must have your work cut out for you, because I guess the same thing probably still applies. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of walls of silence. Like we, some people we have got on, like Brain, his drummer, and stuff like that, and Bebby Rise and Falls, who worked on Alice. But I don't know whether it was just because of his old age, but we did reach out to Bob Alcivar, who did a lot of the arrangements on Foreign Affairs, and then he just didn't get back to us. He said he'd do it, and then he just suddenly went completely quiet. So
same with Chris Bloom. He was up for talking about Big Time and why it's not on DVD, and then we just heard nothing from him.
But we're still lucky that we've gotten.
Sorry, is Bob Alcivar still alive?
He is still alive. Yeah.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, he's on Facebook, which is even more remarkable. But yeah, he's out there still. Like, in terms of the book itself, like there's a balance you've got to strike, isn't there, between music criticism and biographical content, which I think Lowside does brilliantly. Like, we get a lot of your opinions on the songs, but also we get the narrative pushing forward. Like, is that something that you've perfected writing these books? Because I know that if me and Sam, maybe just our podcast genes, if we were to do a Waits book, which we maybe spoke about doing more of a revolution ahead sort of thing, we just want to get in the weeds with the songs and the chord progressions and the melodies and stuff. But do you often find yourself having to be a bit more on a popular front, maybe having to cater to people who aren't as interested in, the melody and stuff?
I mean, I just, it never occurred to me that you couldn't do both. And so I occasionally would read reviews or just comments about the book, like he's very opinionated about the music, or in Hotel California, people was like, he's got opinions about the music, as if somehow, I was expected to just like.
Yeah, how dare he? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it never occurred to me that you wouldn't really, so that otherwise you just been writing in a completely neutral, disinterested way about the Eagles music and not distinguishing good Eagles music from bad Eagles music. It seems to me that that's part of the remit, you know. So I wanted very much to try and do justice to the sonics and just the flavors, the constructions, the everything about Waits's music. I felt that was essential, really. And I hope I did get some kind of balance, strike a balance between, moving the story forward. I mean, I think I tried. The only bit of it really I felt like I sort of really overdid it was where I set myself that I felt like I had to say something about every single track on all of them.
Yes. Yeah, there was a lot, yeah.
And in hindsight, that really did seem a bit excessive, really. I mean, but once you've started, it's almost like you can't really stop.
Mm-hmm. If you do bastards and ballers, you got to do brawlers, you know.
Yeah, well, exactly. So, I mean, but looking back, I probably wouldn't have felt quite so obliged to say something about every single track on that box.
Well, like one of the amazing things you did, and something that me and Tom were so captured by back in the day, and was just the fact that you put your top 40 songs in order, and that was absolutely mind blowing for us. I'd been never seen that, and now here in 2020, I did want to ask you: has that top 40 changed at all, especially since the release of Bad As Me?
Well, I would definitely probably now put some things from Bad As Me on there. I mean, I loved that record so much. I think it's one of the best records he ever made. And, that's rare for someone of his vintage. People just don't tend to. Oh, well, of course, you could cite numerous examples. I'm sure people would say Leonard Cohen made some of his greatest music in his kind of waning years. But, you don't expect someone of Waits' vintage to come out with a record as good as bad as Bad As Me, as good as Bad As Me.
As good, yeah.
As bad as good as me.
And I just thought it was actually, to me, it was a really interesting change of direction. Just showed, how willing he was to get out of, I mean, not to say a rut, but just to kind of say, let's just try something different, a different approach. I think a more musical approach. So definitely, I would say there'd be at least 3 or 4 tracks from that in that top 40. But otherwise, wouldn't probably change very much. I doubt that my kind of top, my absolute favorite Waits songs. I don't think any of them are going to change that much, to be honest with you. How high the Bad As Me tracks would go, I don't know what you'd kick out to make room for them. That would be difficult. You might just have to sort of. I'd probably have made it a top 50 and just rammed a few other things in. But top 40 just sounds right because it's just the top 40. It's such a
we're conditioned that way.
Part of kind of the American charts, the idea of top 40. So but
of course,
probably my top 10 wouldn't change.
Well, speaking of Bad As Me, so that's something that's happened new in the Waits orbit since you've published the book. It has been, a decade or so since you published it. And, a lot of books get reissued with new content at the back. I'm pretty sure one of the Waits books got reissued. I think Up to Orphans, maybe it had only covered up to Real Gone or something at that point. Like, is there any temptation on your part to go back and release some more chapters at the end of Lowside? Because he's been in a lot of movies. There's been some the stuff at the Fringe with the French musical. Bad, like, have you ever
Shenandoah? Yeah.
Well, the answer to that is I mean, I'm well aware, obviously, that there are major books and biographies that get updated, and I never feel any great temptation to just plow over old ground. I just don't. I kind of feel like, it's a bit of like a love affair. It's over. I don't really want to go back there. Not to say that there's nothing definitive. I mean, there'll be a definitive biography of Tom Waits after his death, I'm sure, which will sort of encapsulate everything. But I get so immersed in a subject the thought of kind of going back and sort of digging, I don't feel the inclination to do it, and it's maybe, I don't know, I don't know what that's really about. It's probably because I've just moved on to other things and I don't particularly like to kind of, it's not to say, well, I've done Tom Waits in any kind of arrogant way, certainly not. But the idea of updating and revising, I mean, you know that someone like Grill Marcus has updated and revised Mystery Train probably about 20 times. I don't know how many editions it's going to, and he writes all these endless. I mean, the footnotes to that book are now, I think, sort of longer than the original book was. And that's almost like something that's just a kind of living organism that just sort of sprouts all these new things. He can go off in so many different directions with that. Whereas the idea of going back and I don't know, writing a couple more, 2 or 3 more chapters to bring the story up to date. I mean, look, it's not to say if a publisher didn't kind of favour it and say, we'll give you lots of money to do that, I wouldn't think about it, but they haven't. So, it's not really an issue. I think from their point of view, or a publisher's point of view, is an updated and revised edition really necessarily going to sell that many more copies than the thing as it originally came? Is it ultimately worth it, And I'm a busy guy these days. Writing book pages takes up so much of my time. I don't really have time to write books anymore. Is the honest truth. So anyway, that's a very long-winded answer.
No, it's interesting. And one of the other things, in terms of it being repackaged, I suppose, in a certain way, we had the Faber Social Greatest Hits, which for people who aren't aware were 6 kind of great recent classics of music criticism, amongst them Nick Kent's The Dark Stuff, and Rob Young's Electric Eden, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Barney, but I think that's a masterpiece, that book.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've read, what was the first one you mentioned? Yeah, so I read both of those. Rip It Up and Start Again's on there, Viv Albertine as well. Yeah, I've read all of those that you've mentioned. I haven't read the Kim Gordon book.
No, I haven't read that.
And there might have been one other, I can't remember. But I mean, it was very flattered and honoured to be in that company, and I thought it was a nice little sort of set, I have to say. So whether that's made a huge difference in terms of, has it reached a slightly different market? Not sure, to be honest with you. But I'm glad, I'm glad the thing's still in print,
No, it's. I mean, it is the reference guide, isn't it, Sam? I mean, me and Sam are, obsessed with many bands, the Beatles included, and there's just obviously a billion books about the Beatles. But with Waits, really, there's the one book. There's Lowside of the Road. I don't think anyone would point to any other, really.
No one comes anywhere close.
There are at least 2 or 3 collections of interviews.
There are, yeah.
Given, and I mean, I think those are very valid because. Well, not only are they just sources of information, but I mean, he is such a great interviewer.
Oh yeah.
Interviewee. Such a great interviewee. One of the most rewarding interviewees I think anyone could hope for. I mean, if he's in a good mood, which sometimes he isn't. But I mean, you could read conversations with Waits quite happily, I think, as much as you could read any book about an artist. So I think those are extremely valid. And there's good information in the J.S. Jacobs book, and there's information in Patrick's Patrick's biography. I mean, I had at least 2 long interviews to draw on that I had done with Tom, and a couple of 2 or 3 phone interviews I'd done. So I did feel like I had a sort of rapport with the guy. But then everyone wants to believe that. But I mean, certainly he may have a very different opinion. But I felt really like happy with the encounters that I had with him. I really enjoyed speaking with him. He made me laugh so much. He's such a funny man, and just a joy to speak with, and I would count it as a real honour that I've been able to interview him.
One of the things that's so great about the book, though, is that you were there to interview Waits, because so many of like the contemporaneous Beatles biographies, like Philip Norman's Shout and stuff, just have aged so terribly, and yet I can see this being the key work for the next, several decades. For us, the shorthand, the way we describe you on the show, is the Mark Lewison of Tom Waits. And with that in mind, I'd like to ask, as a little question, what would you base a Tom Waits roadshow on, in the same way that he's done his Hornsey Road series on?
Oh, you mean the Abbey Road thing he did?
Yes, I went to that just last October. It was fantastic. Did you get to see it by any chance?
No, I didn't. I heard good things about it, and I don't know Mark that well. I'm going to mess him a couple of times. I ran into him actually last year at Roy Carr's funeral, and we had a really nice chat actually, and we were all very sad about Roy, who is one of the kind of grand old men of the NME, and so there was a poignant day, and there were a few old kind of veterans there. What would I base it on? I mean, probably, I guess it'd probably be Swordfish Trombones, I think, as being such a kind of pivotal change in his career, and it's a joy to talk about Swordfish Trombones, I think. So there's so many great albums there. I mean, I really love them all. There's no album I really dislike.
No, even The Black Rider has its moments, even though it is quite impenetrable to the layman, as it were.
Yeah, I do struggle with Tom in full kind of Brechtian Germanic mode. It's interesting, but I mean, I'm just sort of lazy, or too dependent on melody. I think he is such a great melodist that when he sort of goes in the opposite direction, it doesn't feel entirely authentic. It doesn't feel like, it's not the Waits that I really want to hear. Sometimes when he goes in that direction, I just think it works stupendously. But some of the stuff is quite hard work, intentionally.
And one of the things I wanted to consider as well, obviously, you worked at Mojo for many years, and I subscribe to Mojo magazine currently. And I initially got into Mojo magazine because Waits was on the cover. I think it was in 2010, where he supposedly guest edited the issue. I mean, let's just take a little tangent. When you have people on the cover and it's like guest edited by Waits, he's not guest editing. He's not there at the printing press, right? Or what?
Certainly wasn't there at the printing press. No, I mean, I wasn't involved with Mojo at that point, so I couldn't really speak about that issue. But I think there was certainly input. He would have been on the phone a few times, and he would have taken the job seriously. It's not something that Waits would have agreed to do and then just kind of farmed out to somebody else. So I think he certainly had a fair amount to do with it. But he wouldn't have come to London to supervise.
No, he wouldn't have.
Sure.
No, he wouldn't have been in his sort of Citizen Kane bag or something like that. But I mean, the reason I ask is because I started getting back into Mojo. I think it was about 18 months ago or so, when Waits again was on the cover, and it was a picture from the Frank Swordfish era. And it kind of made me think about Waits, because with Mojo and Uncut and all these magazines, they kind of have their coterie of like 20 cover stars, don't they? Your Dylans, your Queens, Fleetwood Macs, etc. But Waits is kind of in this standing water, isn't he? Like, you certainly wouldn't put someone like Zappa on the cover of Mojo, but Waits is weird but kind of accessible as well. He kind of is in that in-between, isn't he?
Yeah, I think so. There's something about a really eccentric solo American artists that appeals to the kind of Mojo sensibility. And, there's such a body of work there. I think Waits, it's not like, I mean, Neil Young seems to be on the cover of these magazines sort of 3 times a year. And I can't really work out why, because he doesn't sell it anymore. I'm a Neil Young fan, just to be clear. But I mean, there's a sort of rotating cast, isn't there? I think Waits is in that company now, but he's off to one side. He's at one remove from it, in that he has do you know, he's never really been part of the rock and roll circus. You know, he doesn't fit very. You think of something like the Roy Orbison Black and White Night.
Right.
I always sort of, when you see him performing in that, you always sort of think, did he actually sort of rather regret having said yes to this? Because he's not his people. You know, he loved Roy Orbison and he wanted in his own way to pay homage to the Big O, I think. But did he really want to be on stage with the great and good of sort of, you know, LA's polite rock society, you know? You know, it's just all a bit kind of, just a bit too cozy, isn't it? And he is, you know, he's just off on his own. He's not a great, aside from his kind of occasional collaborations with people like Keith Richards, which always, I mean, at the time seemed surprising, but it said more about Keith's respect for Waits. I think Keith said so much about Keith getting kind of bored in the Rolling Stones and getting rejuvenated by Waits, I think. But anyway, I've lost the thread of where I was going with that.
Yeah, it was kind of a rambling question about Waits and Mojo and appreciation like that. But I guess he's the, like, I don't know if you saw, Barney, just yesterday, John Mulvey announced on Twitter that Talking Heads are going to be on the cover of Mojo for the first time. And, you know, Waits is probably the biggest weirdo outside of David Byrne, I suppose, that could be on a major music magazine cover.
Yeah, but he is, you know, I suppose one way of looking at Waits to say he's like the biggest cult musician, the biggest cult star, rock star on the planet. I mean, he's not a rock star, of course, but he's got a very, very big cult following. You know, he's just one of those people. Everybody wants in on Waits. I mean, you know, and it was just so exemplified by that single show at Hammersmith, where just everybody, all these like alternative rock icons were sort of
that you speak about at the end of Lowside. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Johnny Depp was there, wasn't he? And like Tim Burton and
Tom York, PJ Harvey. I mean, everybody was literally selling their firstborn child to get into the show. You know, probably sort of knowing that another sort of 2 decades would probably go by before he came anywhere near London again. You know, so I think it's a huge cult following. Many people have at least like one Tom Waits album in their collection, you know, and so he makes sense as a sort of Mojo cover star, because you know it's going to be interesting, you know it's going to be different, you know it's not going to be predictable. It's not another boring story about Fleetwood Mac recording Rumours.
Did you know they did cocaine? Oh, I never knew. Oh,
not that that's a boring story, but when it's been told 28 times.
Exactly. It's just so overdone, isn't it? We know. Yeah.
Lennon doing LSD.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the very first time you met Waits then? Was that for anything to do with the book, or was that like a separate interview for something you were writing at the time?
Yeah, so that was, I was very fortunate that, Rob Partridge at Island was such a lovely man and such a, you know, he just kind of made things happen, and he kind of, you know, he just thought outside the typical kind of release schedules and promotion schedules. And I just sort of got this trip, you know, on Island's dime to go to the States and do, I think I was doing 3 different things, to be honest, as I recall. The main one was U2 in Philadelphia, and then we ended up back in New York. You know, Waits, I think, had been, you know, Waits had, this would have been 85, and I think Swordfish Trombones had been like the album of the year at the end of, does that even make sense? I'm trying to think why
85 would have been Rain Dogs, yeah,
but he hadn't. The point is, I know that he hadn't released Rain Dogs at this point. So basically, it was literally because Rob had this great relationship with Waits. I think he just said to kind of, you know, Chris Blackwell or whoever, look, you know, Waits is you know, working in New York. He's living in New York now. Enemy's going to be on the East Coast. Why don't we just do an interview with Waits, just to kind of keep him in the public eye. Swordfish Trombones has this incredible reputation. I'm sure it was the album of the year, I guess 83. I just don't remember the exact sort of sequence, but so that was it. It was kind of like Waits, he did this interview. He wasn't doing any other interviews, and that was so lovely because he wasn't being ground down by the demands of Island's publicists. It was just literally, I'll take a break from recording Rain Dogs, and I'll meet this NME guy in this bar down on Spring Street, and or he just kind of, he probably just came from home, the apartment he and Kathleen were renting, and it was just lovely because he was just in it was very, very relaxed. It was, in my recollection, it was sort of like brunch kind of time. It may have been a bit as early as 11 o'clock in the morning. I don't think it was lunch per se, but it was, that was it, 1985, and it was wonderful. I mean, I loved it, and it was just so rare to be talking to someone who wasn't on the promotional treadmill.
So there's normally food involved in these stories. Was there coffee? Was it pizza? Was it cigarettes?
That I don't really remember. It certainly wasn't like a 3-course lunch, but it was. He might have been drinking a beer. I might have been drinking a coffee. I mean, I think it was a bar. And we may have ate something like, knowing Tom, you think he would probably had some eggs in some, form of
a side of toast.
A side of toast.
Did he eat eggs? I can't really go on the record and say
sure.
That he ate eggs. He may not have eaten anything at all, but it was very relaxed, and it was fun, and I mean, even though he was at work on the record, I mean, he talked a lot about the record. I mean, at that point, I think he was planning to call it Evening Train Wrecks. That was the working title that I seem to remember. And he just talked about, we talked a lot about New York. I mean, he hadn't been in New York that long. Although, as you guys I'm sure know, he had first moved to New York on his own to try and just reboot his career. And then had been brought back to LA to work on One from the Heart. So it was this sort of weird way in which, he was being sort of dragged back into the 70s by Coppola. And then finally did move to New York. And I think, made a kind of valiant effort to reinvent himself, not as a kind of New Yorker per se, but just to do something really different in a different environment with different kinds of musicians and different inspirations, So he was right in the middle of that, and there was the track Midtown. It was very much a sort of, it was Waits's take, not on the actual literal, Big Apple, but his kind of interpretation of an urban environment like New York that was so different from Los Angeles and San Diego.
And I know that you've interviewed countless legends as the audio interview segments on the RBP podcast, the Rocks Back Pages podcast, attest to. By the way, everyone go listen to that podcast. I want to just reaffirm that, it's an incredible podcast, such a celebration of music journalism, and you, Jasper and Mark, are great together. Is there anyone that you've met in person that had the same aura as Waits? Who would you volley against that?
In terms of I don't. This guy always comes to mind as somebody that it's just such a pleasure to talk to. He's so articulate about music and is such a passionate fan himself, and also so incredibly funny. And that's Robert Plant. Different world from Waits, but not as far removed, I think, from Waits as some might be. He certainly, he has done a Waits song, I think, hasn't he? Plant, I think he did a Waits song.
He did. What did they do? Trampled Rose, Alison Krauss. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well done.
On the Raising
Sand. Yeah.
There is a Waits song on there. So I mean, I know he's a Waits fan, and I mean, I just mentioned him because, I mean, I was a huge Zeppelin fan up to Physical Graffiti, and I've liked some of the stuff Plant's done on his own. But I mean, I've interviewed him 2 or 3 times, and in a sense, he's a bit more genial, I would say, than Waits. I mean, sometimes Tom's bite is worse than his bark, probably. But actually, he's also just got a big heart and a lovely soul. I've enjoyed enormously talking to both of them about music, and Plant is really good fun. I'm trying to think of others. I mean, let me just think, because I've actually been putting together some old pieces, and so I've got this to refer to, which is good. I don't have to scratch the top of my head here. I love Bobby Womack passionately. I love talking with him. Randy Newman is an absolute delight to speak with. Steely Dan, I interviewed a number of times. Just wonderful to talk to. Jimmy Webb, I adore. So people like this. I loved interviewing Jack White, funnily enough. Just such an interesting music guy. Who else? I mean, there have been really intelligent people like Ry Cooder's really smart, Todd Rundgren. Yeah. But both of them incredibly smart guys. A bit less kind of huggable, a bit less warm-hearted, I would say. Keith Richards, I loved interviewing him. We've already mentioned him. So those are some of the people I really enjoyed talking to. Robert Wyatt, those are some of the names that I would probably pull out of the hat. That was the side of the road falling to the floor.
That wasn't the hat itself being pulled.
That's
man.
a sign.
Yeah.
What does it mean? Let's not read too much.
No.
So, of course, so much of the draw of Waits is this mystery around this public face or mask that he may or may not wear. Is it an act? Is it just something that he naturally does? When did the transition start? Was he frank? Blah, blah, blah. Was there ever a moment where you felt like the mask came off and he let his guard down in front of you when you were talking to the person Tom Waits?
I mean, look, I think what he would say is there's no very clear binary distinction between the real any of us and the masks we wear, and that's a big part of what his music and his writing is about. There isn't some, I remember him saying this to me very, very clearly in the second interview I did, the one in Santa Rosa. The sort of world of kind of mojo interpretation is sort of predicated on the idea that Neil Young is absolutely authentic. The Neil Young of after the gold rush in his patched denim jeans is somehow not doing an act, and I remember saying, Neil is doing an act, and it sounds like sacrilege probably to some people, but of course it is an act, and every artist is doing an act, and there isn't, how do you define what is, we put our personalities together, we construct them. Each of us construct our personalities out of all sorts of diffuse elements, disparate and diffuse elements. And, who's to say what is absolutely authentic and what isn't? What I would say about the trajectory of Tom's career is that, as a young man, and I mean, when we're all young, we're striving to define ourselves. We're striving to work out our identities and who we are and what we're not. And I think as a young singer-songwriter, he definitely, in the sort of glorious confusion of youth, he did construct this persona in opposition to the prevailing kind of rock and roll personae of the time. He did, in a very counterintuitive way, he defined himself as an old man, or at least as an older man. I mean, like when he was a kid, he'd listen to his father's friends, Frank Sinatra albums, rather than sort of sitting around Stone listening to Jimi Hendrix records, So from a very early age, he just wanted to go in his own direction, I think. So the Asylum period is very much, you can say it's very artificial. This is a guy pretending to be some figure from the 40s in sort of downtown Los Angeles. And this isn't real. There's nobody like this now. Why is he doing this? And some people kind of were suspicious of that. But I think it's a very legitimate kind of, artistic choice to make, because, he defined an area, a kind of cultural area for himself. And then he wrote songs within that. They're not any less affecting because the idioms are kind of old-fashioned and deliberately sort of backward-looking. I think you take it on its own terms, and Tom Traver's blues is as moving as anything that could have been written in that era, supposedly from a place of authenticity. The emotions are universal. But I think, the truth is that I probably thought in the 70s. I mean, I remember the first time I thought about Tom Waits at all was probably when I was about 14, and I opened a copy of Time Out. I mean, it might even have been, I probably was 16, and it might have been when he first came to London to perform. I think it would have been. And I remember seeing a picture of him, was he playing Ronnie Scott? I can't remember now. And, I remember seeing this picture of him looking like a kind of beatnik in a slouch cap and, wearing a tie. And at that point, everything was sort of, I don't know, Hatfield and the North, Gong and sort of, it just sort of like, who does this guy think he is? I mean, the little that I knew of your Kerouacs and your Ginsbergs and your beat poets weren't enough for me even really to form a judgment. But I just thought, this guy's probably a phony. This just looks it just looks a bit phony, And I just certainly don't think that anymore. The thrift store suit. Well, why not? Why not define yourself as something different? Why not have a guy with a stand-up bass and Shirley Man playing drums? If it's just slavish and retro, and it's not actually doing anything new with these forms, then fine, slag it off. Plenty of people have done things like that, and it's just not been very interesting. But Waits did something extraordinarily interesting with all that stuff, and wrote about the modern world, wrote about the real environment that he was in. It wasn't like he was writing about Mickey Spillane. I mean, he was writing about, cocaine dealers in the 1970s, but as if he was, some sort of private detective, So to me, it's at the end of the day, do the emotions kind of stand up or not? That's all that matters. Does the music move you or doesn't it?
Have you? I think you spoke about that first Waits show overseas in Lowside, if I remember, where he had like a television set on stage and he turned it on, and I think Match of the Day was playing or something like that, and the audience were watching along. So I love that little vignette. Like, have you spoken to Waits since the book came out? I know there wouldn't have been really any need to, but has those lines of inquiry still been open, or?
No, I've not had any need to approach the Waits camp. I mean, the only strange thing that happened, and one should never read too much into any of this stuff, is that I remember being contacted. I don't know whether it was simply on Facebook, a Facebook friend request from Teresa Redburn, who did his press in the US. I mean, essentially was like the kind of American equivalent of Rob Partridge, the late great Rob Partridge, who we all miss terribly. And well, I will mention that I did when Rob died, God rest his soul. A lot of people came to say goodbye to him at the crematorium in London, and we were all crammed into this fairly small chapel, you know, and you two were sitting in one row, and you know, lo and behold, I realized that Tom and Kathleen were sitting, you know, 3 rows in front of me, and it was, I'm not sure the book had even come out at that point. I'm trying to remember, but it was a very weird, it's a very weird thing just to be so close to both of them. And then there was a reception, and I was, you know, I couldn't relax because they were standing on the other side of the room, and I kind of a sort of slightly masochistic, reckless part of me wanted to go over and say hello. And then I just thought it's probably not the wise thing to do. But I couldn't really relax or concentrate on anything else, you know, just standing in that room, knowing they were there and trying not to sort of look at them, you know. It was just one of those, you know. But I was going to, so Teresa Redburn made contact, and I said to her, I'm surprised to hear from you. I mean, she had plenty of other clients. Tom wasn't her only client. And I said, I thought my name, I don't know what I said. I thought I was persona non grata in camp, you know. And she said something like, you know, never assume, or don't assume that, or, you know, I can't remember exactly what she said, you know. I've got a sort of mental block around it, but it sort of seemed slightly indicated to me that, you know, whether they've read the book or not read the book or what, you know, what she seemed to be implying without declaring it, and maybe it's just what I wanted to hear, was that they didn't think I was a, you know, piece of shit. That's all I wanted to know, you know. That'll do, you know. I mean, I totally get that. I mean, I think, you know, if any of us thinks, you know, not that I would think that anyone would write a book about me, but if I imagined being in, say, Waits' position, or a position of somebody like that, the idea that someone was kind of, you know, researching your life and talking to people about you and going around, you know what hatchet jobs people do, you know, people dig up dirt, you know, it's just going to be something that's going to make you think, I'd rather somebody wasn't doing that, to be honest. You know, I get it. You know, I get it. And I think because Waits has such a kind of strong belief that the whole biographical project is flawed from the get-go, you know, he would say that the biographer goes off in search of things which are somehow going to explain why Tom Waits wrote this song. You know, this happened, you know, this girl broke his heart, so he wrote this song, you know. And of course it's just way too crass and simplistic, you know. And I always remember him saying to me in that second interview, and I always loved it, it's sort of like, you know, people ask me, is this song about, you know, is it about you know, is it about
Ricky Lee Jones or something?
Is it about Nancy Sinatra, or is it about Nancy Reagan or something, you know? And I forget, you know, he was just very funny. He just said, you know, it's like, if I tell you that this song is about Nancy Reagan, are you going to really hear it any differently, you know? And he says something, you know, of course, all my songs are about Nancy Reagan, you know. And then the other thing, I'm kind of conflating two things that he said to me, because the other thing he said was, you know, it's like, you know, in terms of his own persona, you know, am I Jimi Hendrix, or am I Frank Sinatra, you know, or am I in fact Jimmy Sinatra? I mean, and I like that, you know. It's like this sort of approach to the work of an artist like Tom Waits, it can be so reductive. And it all goes back to, and I quoted this right at the end of the book, Susan Sontag's famous essay Against Interpretation, you know, which is written, I think, as early as like 1963 or 64. And it just counsels against that rather kind of hackneyed interpretation of an artist's work, you know, as if somehow there's a sort of direct kind of synergy between what an artist experiences in his or her life and then transmutes into art. It's just utter nonsense. You know, when you write a song or a poem, or you make a painting or whatever, you know, the idea that one experience lies behind this piece of work. I mean, it's just absurd. It's all kinds of things. And when you create a character, you're not just painting a portrait of somebody. All sorts of things feed into it. And I think that's really his point. And I hope that in the way that the book isn't. I very much took that on board and worked very hard not to reduce his music to just some kind of mimetic depiction of stuff that he'd gone through in his life. I mean, I don't remember having to sort of take an awful lot of stuff out. The only thing that in hindsight really should have been taken out, because it would have just made my life a lot easier, was just basically saying that Herb Cohen was a crook, because even though he was a crook, it wasn't a terribly smart thing to say, because it led to a lawsuit. Random House and myself were sued for $1 million by Herb Cohen because I basically said he was a crook. After, I don't know, a kind of year of I mean, look, it could have been a lot worse. It wasn't that bad, but it was a lot of, there were a lot of calls to a law firm in Random House hired a legal firm in Los Angeles, and it was quite a big deal. I had to spend quite a lot of time on the phone with these guys who were great, and they won the case. He had to pay all the costs, and frankly, to this day, I say fuck him.
Hey,
I really do. He's a nasty piece of work, and he should have just accepted that he had been called out something which was manifestly true. Any of his clients would have said that he ripped them off. And so he had to pay all the costs, and then he died. And I don't take any great pleasure in that, but I imagine the stress of all that, and then having to pony up all the legal expenses, it probably did for him. But having said that, I'm still quite chuffed that I actually got to sit down with the notorious Herb Cohen, and it was a good thing for me to be able to put in the book, because he literally never talked to anybody. It was only through the intercession of a lovely man called Carl Gottlieb that I got this kind of audience with a man who felt like a kind of a sort of criminal overlord. I mean, meeting Herb Cohen was, it was kind of like meeting. I always think he reminded me. He didn't remind me at the time because the movie hadn't come out, but Jack Nicholson's character in The Departed.
Wow.
Is kind of the closest that I can. Not that he was doing the things that Jack does in that movie, but it was that's when I saw The Departed. It was like seeing Herb Cohen on the screen. I mean, look, Tom took Herb to court, and won, and so all of that was interesting. But I don't remember having to take anything specifically out. I mean, it had a pretty thorough legal read. Tom never sued me, yet, thank God. No, I mean, they never sued me for anything. So there was a lot more work taking out stuff from Small Town Talk, my Woodstock book, because of Sally Grossman. That was a much taller order, and we just had to play safe and take out some real juicy dirt. So,
well, at least you didn't get sued by Jerry Yester either, the other monster of the early Wait story.
The monster.
Have you not come across that?
I must be missing something here.
Yeah, he was convicted for child pornography charges.
No, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
I don't have a date for you, but it was quite recent.
It was last year. This is just from former Loving Spoonful member sentenced for child porn charges. Yeah.
Oh my God!
I know.
You are no. Is he? Let's just have a look. Yeah, he's still alive. Fucking hell.
Great.
Bad as Me Too. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Oh my God.
I mean. I know. It's a bit of a sour thing to bring up there, but yeah, that is a bit of a fraud.
I mean, look, these it's not insignificant. I mean, I must have interviewed Jerry 2 or 3 times. including a sit down with him for Lowside, and always got on well with him. So, well, I'm very sad to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
No, and it turns out Mark Ribot was the second gunman on the grassy knoll as well. It's getting pretty crazy out there.
Although I would love to have spoken to, I did meet him once in New York. I mean, I never interviewed him, but I met him, I guess, maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, and he was a very Waitsian kind of figure, quite a saturnine individual. I think one of the great musicians that Waits has worked with. It would have been really nice to talk to him about working with Tom, for sure.
Just wrapping up now. I mean, people can go to Rock's back pages, of course, this incredible archive that you oversee with Mark and Jasper and various other people associated with it. And just looking at the weight section, I mean, particularly beefy, 110 articles people can check there. This is going back all the way to the 70s and all the way up really to modern day. The most recent one is written by yourself for Classic Rock, talking about the story of Swordfish Trombones. I mean, I guess I just want to point people to the website, Bonnie. Me and Sam use it all the time. It's an amazing resource.
Well, that's great. I mean, yeah. I mean, obviously, you can hear my interviews, or at least one of them, with Waits on there, and some other audio interviews that have been done, and they're definitely worth hearing because it's just a joy to hear him speak, and answer questions. So I'd definitely recommend it. I mean, there is this massive Tom Waits site. Tom
Waits Library.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, he's one of the beneficiaries of that kind of fanaticism. I mean, obviously, slight misgivings about sites like that, but it was invaluable to me. Fact is, there's lots of people's work on there that's it's done without permission. These interviews are added without permission, which is something that one could never say about Rock's Back Pages. Everything that's on Rock's Back Pages is there with the writer's permission, and I'm just a believer in that. But of course, I availed myself of the Tom Waits Library. It was incredibly helpful, and indeed, we've sourced some of the pieces that subsequently ended up on RBP by our writers for that purpose. So, I mean, it's the same with the Joni Mitchell, whatever that's called, the Joni Mitchell Experience or Joni Mitchell site. Can't remember what the name of it is, but there's there's dozens, hundreds probably of interviews there. So it's not, I mean, if every artist had resources like that dedicated to them, it would jeopardize our business model.
Right.
But of course, it's helpful from a research point of view.
One last question just before we let you go. We are nearly approached a decade now since Bad As Me, which was put out whilst we were at university. That was definitely a seminal album for us. Do you still hold out any hope that we are going to see another full studio album by the man himself, or do you think he's moved on to things like The Dead Don't Die and Buster Scruggs and pursuing acting and stuff like that?
I find it very hard to think that there won't be another studio record, another album. I mean, I'm sure there will be. I don't know if I've read that he's working. I think he is working on something. I mean, he only just turned 70, which probably sounds old to you guys. I'm 60 now, so it doesn't sound that old to me. And I think that, I certainly think he's capable of making, 2 or 3 more great records. I've always wished he would. The sort of old sentimentalist in me wishes he would just do like an album of just Waits at the piano. Just go back and do that, and tour, and just do a tour of just playing the piano. Really without. Does he really need anybody else? It would be just fascinating. I think. I mean, I think he would feel that was very regressive. But what I loved partly about Bad As Me that it was a really musical record. The arrangements were really thoughtful. There was, I mean, a real musicality to it, great band, great players. And it sort of seemed to sort of steer him back in a slightly more musical a more arranged musical kind of direction. And I don't know whether, whereas kind of Real Gone, it almost at moments, it just sort of left, melody and musicality behind. It just went into this, it almost became self-parodic, I think. It was like, Waits in a sort of barn bashing a fucking piece of metal and sort of barking, and it almost got to that point where it just didn't really want to make music anymore. And so Bad as Me, I really embraced for that reason. But I would have loved him just to do a kind of really stripped down record, or at the very least just a very small piece record, just maybe not going back to like a kind of jazz trio thing at all, but just something quite, I mean, some of my favorite stuff is stuff like, Take It With Me, the and Pony, and just quiet, quite reflective pieces. I could happily take a whole album of that,
Absolutely, I do concur with that. And he does seem a little bit adverse to the whole rigorous touring schedule. But if we got something like, I don't know, Broadway, like what Springsteen would do, maybe not in Broadway, but you can see Waits maybe in San Diego or something. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love the idea of him doing. Yeah, I mean,
the residency. Yeah.
Yeah, a residency. Maybe you could. Yeah, no. I was going to say not Vegas and not.
No.
And Branford, Missouri, but some sort of like really twisted version of that. If you could find a really sleazy old,
like Murfreesboro or something, just somewhere in the middle of nowhere, like
I mean, I think Los Angeles, if they could just resurrect that, and he just did a kind of month at the Ivar with sort of. You couldn't really do strippers anymore because it's just we're in too woke an era now.
True.
That's not going to fly. But just some
Bad as Me too. Yeah.
Yeah, and he wouldn't. I mean, I don't think he would even be interested in revisiting that. But just just something that was. Yeah, I mean, I don't think he doesn't like touring. I mean, that's for sure. I mean, maybe he has just decided he's not going to tour again, and that's that, But I'd be sort of, I can't help thinking he will do one last. There will be at least one last hurrah. There will be another album. There'll be some live performances of some kind.
Well, you heard it, folks. Barney Hoskyns confirms new Tom Waits album.
We'll suspect some hopes for something.
Barney Hoskyns promises new Tom Waits album. That's going to be the headline in the papers tomorrow. That's absolutely
definitely
fantastic.
Get trouble with the Waits camp.
We don't want any more lawsuits, so we'll revoke that. But I mean, Barney, finally, yourself, your website, your work, like where do people go?
I do have my own website, I mean, I'm not, my life at the moment pretty much is Rock's Back Pages, it has turned into a full-time job, and I just got to a point where I couldn't really juggle writing / certainly not books with running RBP. It had to be one or the other, and it just is ultimately, I mean, the thing about writing a book like Lowside of the Road is it's a very, very isolating process, as I'm sure, other writers or biographers will tell you. It's very, you're kind of on your own. I mean, the sort of fun parts are when you do get great interviews with people for a book, and that's great. But then you got to transcribe them all. That's very isolating. And I mean, you just do go into a kind of tunnel. You briefly come out of the tunnel when the book is published. You might do a few readings, you might do a few book signings, and then it's sort of all over. It's quite a lonesome way to live, and I don't feel any great appetite for. I mean, there isn't any subject I'm just craving to write about or biographize. I sort of feel like, I don't feel any great craving to do it. It's too much like hard work, and it's not like running RBP isn't hard work. It is pretty hard work, but at least it engages me with others. And right now, I kind of enjoy that. I am sort of putting together some old pieces, and if there's any publisher out there that doesn't flinch at the idea of publishing them, then that might be another book, but in this world, most publishers will just say, well, unfortunately, it's just we're not going to be able to persuade the sales team. So, and the sales team pretty much determine everything. So, but I'm putting them together anyway. And if all else fails, I'll just put them on my website. But there are pieces that I'm quite proud of, little profiles of people that I really love, no hatchet jobs, just really sincere kind of, attempts to do justice to people like some of the people I've mentioned earlier, but people like Dr. John, and more recently people like Elliott Smith. Some that I haven't actually. I never interviewed Amy Winehouse, but I ended up writing quite a long piece about her because I thought she was pretty fab, So it's always nice to return to what we were saying a lot earlier. It's really, really nice to write about people whose music you really, really rate and revere, And life's too short to spend a lot of time writing about people whose music you either hate or are indifferent to.
Agreed.
So, thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you again. No, this was an absolute treat. And as I said before, me and Sam are huge fans of your work, Lowside in particular. People go and pick that book up in all of its forms. And Sam, any final thoughts or?
No, I've just got to say thank you so much for coming on, man. We've been wanting to do this for a while, and yeah, it's been everything we wanted. So thank you so much.
It's great. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast, and it's been great revisiting Tom Waits with you guys. So keep the torch burning.